Hi there and welcome from Ventura, California to today's webinar, Merchandising Strategies to Connect New Cars with Customers, sponsored by vAuto and hosted by WebAttract, the leader in thought leadership webinars. I'm Lori Dearman, Senior Webinar Producer with WebAttract, and I'll be one of your moderators for today's session. And in just a moment, we'll be introducing our featured presenter, as today's webinar is about learning a more customer-focused pricing and sales process and hearing the results of an Autotrader.com online shopper behavior study that reveals great insights that you can apply to your business right away. You'll also have an opportunity to have your questions answered at the end of the presentation during our Ask the Experts panel session with both of our speakers today. We've invited you, along with a diverse audience of over 150 professionals registered across 35 states and provinces, all to learn a new way to win in new car sales. I do have our first interactive poll for today coming up on the screen. We'd like to hear from you. Do you include custom photos of your new vehicles online? So is that a yes or a no? Or sometimes? And it looks like 86% of us saying yes you do, 2% saying no, and 13 saying sometimes. So really appreciate that information. We'll be coming back to that point a little bit later in today's presentation, so thanks for weighing in. Before we do get started with our content, I want to invite John Griffin, Vice President of Performance Management Software Division at vAuto, to take a moment to welcome you all and tell you what he hopes you'll get out of today's webinar. John?
Thank you, Lori, and I want to thank everyone on the webinar. I did want to take a minute to remind everyone of the purpose of the webinar, and that's to give you insights and strategies about new vehicle merchandising to help you do better in new cars with the new Conquest system. I want to note that the webinar is not about Conquest installation or even a deep dive in how the system works. We'll be covering all that in your Conquest implementation and training. I think the main focus of today's webinar, which features data from Autotrader.com about pricing and merchandising that works in new vehicles, will provide good insights to help you think more strategically about pricing and merchandising your new cars. After the main presentation, I'll briefly touch on the ways Conquest will help you price and merchandise your new vehicles more effectively. I'll also join our speaker for an interactive Q&A. Again, thank you all for being here. Lori, back to you.
Thank you, John. And folks, I must say that I'm very excited to welcome our featured speaker for today, Nathan Tenbrink. Now, Nathan Tenbrink is a senior manager in Autotrader.com's Enterprise Analytics Department. He spent the last 7 years delivering data-driven insights into the marketing, product management, sales, and strategy functions with the online automotive and financial industries. While at Autotrader.com, Nathan's led the delivery of automotive insights related to how vehicle merchandising, pricing, and digital product utilization affect dealers' ability to influence local shoppers online. Prior to that, he focused on delivering web-based labor management, supply chain forecasting, and reporting solutions for the retail and food services industry. Nathan holds a BBA from the University of Georgia and an MBA from Georgia State University. So welcome to the webinar, Nathan. It's such a pleasure to have you with us today.
It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
All right, Nathan, I know we have an action-packed hour, so I'm going to go ahead and let you take it from here.
Awesome. Thanks a bunch. Well, I'm excited to be here today. I've been looking forward to this opportunity to share some data-driven insights related to how consumers are interacting with new vehicles online and how you, the dealer, can really position yourselves to effectively influence those shoppers as they progress through their decision journey. So with that said, we'll go ahead and get started. Well, if you joined the last webinar in the series, you may remember Mark Rikus. His organization consults and offers thought leadership for the automotive industry. Well, the folks over at the Rikus Group, they conducted a qualitative analysis to understand the fundamental functions to a dealership's operation, and they came up with these 8 what we call keys to driving a sale. Today, we're not going to look at all 8. We're going to focus on 5 of those 8 areas where a dealer can have the most impact on driving influence and preference for your dealership. So the 5 areas we're going to focus on today are vehicle selection, pricing, photos, descriptions, and customer handling. As you probably know by now, Conquest was built to provide dealers the opportunity to stock the right cars offer better prices, and then provide a better, more transparent customer experience. Well, today, we're going to investigate what the data says about those relationships, the relationships between those fundamentals, online shopper behavior, and ultimately sales.
Now, Nathan, before we get rolling, how about we stop just a moment, make sure we're all on the same page in terms of where the data comes from?
Yeah, that's a great point, Lori. So we have what's called the digital audience analysis, and that's where the majority of our insights today are going to come from. Now, the digital audience analysis, you'll also hear me refer to it as DAA. It's ongoing research here at autotrader.com that allows us to take a closer look at online consumer behavior during that car shopping process. You may have seen some of the initial releases back in Q4 of 2012, where we were looking specifically at sources of traffic to dealers' websites. Well, today, when we look at the pricing insights, we're going to be focused on the average price of new vehicles viewed on our site, and we'll look at that price relative to the actual price paid. So the data we'll look at today, it includes over 6,000 new vehicle sales. It's going to be across 1,000 or so dealerships. And one thing I want to hammer home as well, the DAA is a really powerful tool for understanding consumer shopping behavior. We do not collect any personally identifiable information, so there's no PII in there. So let's go ahead and dive into our key fundamentals. So the first area where dealers really have an opportunity to drive influence and preference is through vehicle selection. And our first insight is going to explore that relationship between a dealer's inventory mix, what the shoppers are viewing online, and ultimately what they buy. So the first fun stat of the day. So from our DAA, we saw that 42% of vehicles shopped online were the same make as the vehicle purchased. That also means that 58% ultimately purchased a different make. And if we go one layer down, only 32% purchased the exact same model. So again, that's 68% that purchased a different model than the model they shopped online. So how might this look for a real shopper? Since we have the data, let's see what it might shake out to be. A couple things before we look at an actual shopper, though. So car buyers follow many different purchase paths. They can start out looking at one type of vehicle, but somewhere they get influenced along the way in their decision journey, and they become a different type of buyer. A lot of times new car buyers, they start out as a used car shopper. And online shoppers, they change their minds in the same way the buyers change their mind when they're on your lot. So you want to make sure you're there for them online in the same way. So here's an example of a story that we were able to capture by watching by viewing consumer behavior through digital audience analysis. So first, this shopper started off looking at a used Ford Focus and a Honda Accord. And they looked at a variety of vehicles in that mid-size sedan segment across new and used vehicles. We also observed that the shopper was back and forth between different makes and different models on autotrader.com. And then they went and they visited the dealership website. So while on the dealership website, this is where that activity really began to transition to a new vehicle focus. They ended up going to kellybluebook.com, doing some more research on a Nissan Altima, and ultimately, they bought that Nissan Altima. So what's really interesting here, too, is they started looking at the Hondas and the Fords on autotrader.com, but that's what led them to the dealership website, and ultimately, that's where they switched to what they bought. So it's an interesting trend. So what's the implication of this? It's really having a pulse on the high demand inventory. Having that right mix of inventory can really make sure you're putting your dealership in the consideration set of a potential buyer. And there's a reason that you put your used cars next to your new cars rather in the physical world. So you can walk the consumers between them. You can give them that choice. And you really want to be doing the same sort of thing in the online world. And that real shopper example that we walked through, that really does help enforce that shoppers are not just shopping between segments with new and used, but it highlights the dealership's inventory diversity can really help influence that shopper to visit your website. Another important implication, if we look back at that example, was multi-brand. So understanding what's hot in your market, like scarcity, those types of measures, those are important things. And obviously you want to bring that knowledge to the table. You know what sells, you know what's good in your local market. But again, if we think back to that example of that customer's path to purchase, it's important to understand which other make model combinations are being searched for in your market, and then perhaps carrying some of those vehicles as well. And while vehicle selection and acquisition is a critical operational function for a dealer, it also provides some market marketing value as well. So if you're not showing up in a shopper's results, you're probably not going to have that opportunity to influence or be part of that consideration set. So let's move on to the next key function. So the next area where we have this opportunity to drive influence and preference in the online space is in the pricing. But before we jump in, Lori, can we queue up that next poll question?
Sure thing. So folks, coming up on your screen is that next poll. And if you would weigh in, if you posted a price other than MSRP, would you expect gross to go up or go down? So let's see how folks weigh in on this one. Okay, let's take a look. So I'm showing 54% of us saying go up, while 46% of us are saying go down. Does that stack up with what you were expecting, Nathan?
Yeah, that's right in the middle.
It is, really.
Yeah, it's sort of a 50-50 cut almost there. So yeah, we'll hop over to the next slide then.
Absolutely.
Because if it's 50-50, it's kind of hard to tell what's happening. So let's talk about that perception then. That was a great lead in with that. So 54% of you thought that pricing below MSRP would make it go up, and 46 thought it was going down. So there is a long-held belief that greater transparency in the car business, and specifically around the deal, chips away at dealer profits. A lot of times it's described as this race to the bottom. It's the idea that transparency erodes value, it erodes gross. But what we're seeing in the digital audience analysis is giving us some new evidence to the contrary. In fact, we may want to try to reword that to make it a race to the consumer. So before we get too deep into it, though, let's talk about some of the first things that we noticed when we began looking at the consumer behavior and the shopping trends in digital audience analysis. The first thing we noticed was about 60 days out from the actual date of purchase, shoppers are viewing a really wide range of vehicle pricing. We might even assume that some of those shoppers have an idea of what they'd like to pay, but there's also probably some low aspirational shopping going on. Maybe they're trying to figure out what they can get for their money. Specifically what this graph is demonstrating, though, are the VDPs, that's the blue line, that were viewed compared to the average price paid for a new car, which is the orange line. And as you can see, the variation in the VDP views, it narrows and rises the closer you get to the purchase date, with the exception of that one really low outlier. That VDP activity ranges from about $18,000 to about $29,000. You'll also notice the top end of that VDP activity, it doesn't change as much as the lower side of that VDP activity. And that points to some interesting shopper behavior that might be associated with their consideration and their evaluation of their options at various price points. And potentially, there might even be some trim shopping in there. And that's something to keep in mind. We're going to revisit this a little bit later, because if you're doing that kind of shopping, the importance of those custom photos really bubbles to the top. But in general, this provides some really interesting insights into how shoppers are learning as they progress along their decision journey. So what else did we learn? Let's see. So 76% of new car buyers actually pay more than the price point that they shopped. Now that amount, it depends on different circumstances, but for new car buyers, they paid about 1% more. For new car buyers who shop new cars, I should say about 1% more. For used car shoppers who ended up purchasing new, it's about 25% more. And we see this in the DAA data repeatedly and consistently. That stat applies regardless of dealer size. We cut it by a number of different regional DMAs. We looked at luxury, non-luxury makes, imports, domestic, and this statistically does hold up pretty well. So the average price they're paying, again, is about $32,000. So if you remember from 2 slides ago, we had the line chart, that's well above the prices that they looked at online. So now we want to move on to explore the effect of pricing below MSRP versus at MSRP. What we found was that on autotrader.com, when looking at price exclusively, so that's taking out the other factors like merchandising, vehicles that were priced below MSRP, they garnered 34% more VDPs than vehicles that were listed at MSRP. Again, that's exclusive of the that's exclusive to pricing. We took out the merchandising impact. And if it drives that many VDPs, why are VDPs so important? I'm going to assume everybody on the call knows what a VDP is, but I would be remiss if we didn't at least talk to it a little bit. So before we jump right into the VDP, though, let's talk about the SRP, the search results page. So this is our virtual drive-by. In other words, I like to call it the gateway to the VDP. It really is that pre-VDP opportunity to interact with and influence shoppers. On to our VDP, our vehicle detail page view. So the reason why the VDP, or the vehicle detail page view, is such an important metric is that typically the more VDPs that dealers' listings get, the more successful those dealers are on our site. So back to why they're so important. Again, when you list below MSRP, you get 34% more of those VDPs. This is a cool stat, but this is a shopper stat. So we know that that VDP is where you're in your shopping. But what if we were able to take this a step further and look at this through the lens of our DAA and better understand the impact on buyers? So take this stat from shoppers and really see what it does to buyer behavior. And what we found was that dealerships who listed below MSRP online, they captured 11% more buyers at their store. So what do I mean by captured? Well, specifically, it's just another way to say that the dealers who listed below MSRP, they sold 11% more new cars than those dealers who were selling at or listing at MSRP. So just a small decrease in the price listed, it could really attract 11% more buyers. So the bottom line is that the dealers with this pricing strategy for the dealership, they earn more customers. But we want to take this one step further. We want to look at how far car buyers will travel to make a purchase. So we're going to start off with some survey data, understand the attitudinal aspect of shopper behavior, and then we're going to go look at DAA, and we're going to look at what really happened. So a survey of new vehicle shoppers, it indicated that there was a willingness to travel in order to save money off the MSRP of a new vehicle. What we found was that for 10% below MSRP, just over half of the new vehicle shoppers, so 52% or so, said they were willing to travel more than 30 miles to buy that car.
Now, Nathan, I'm guessing this is popping up into more than one person's head out there, so I'm going to pose the question for everybody here. Does it have to be 10%? Wondering how far you think folks would drive if it went, let's say, to 5% below.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we were interested in that as well. And the research indicated that the distance a new shopper said they were willing to travel, it didn't differ significantly between 5% lower and 10% lower than MSRP. And that kind of brought up a very interesting implication. That being that driving down the price is not necessary. Simply using an alternative to MSRP may be the key. And we want to touch on that a little bit later. We're going to do some analysis and show you some insights relative to the MSRP terminology. And it sort of brings that home that it's not about driving the price down. It might just be about not being at MSRP. So again, this was our survey data. Folks said that they would travel for a vehicle that was listed below MSRP. So we go to the DAA and see what behavior tells us, so we can understand exactly what happens behaviorally. So what we saw supports the attitudinal research. That's fantastic. Specifically in DAA, the car buyers actually traveled 10 miles further to buy cars that were listed below MSRP versus cars listed at MSRP. So the 10-mile number doesn't seem like a huge deal, but it does show that shoppers, they'll go to the next dealer in the absence of a strong pricing strategy on the site. So what's the implication? Well, first and foremost, pricing transparency, it attracts the most valuable buyers, and it really can increase dealer profitability. In fact, our data is showing us that there's a significant opportunity for additional incremental profit at the dealership. That can take the form of a different make and model vehicle sale. It also includes service and maintenance contracts and things like extended warranties. The second implication is that new cars priced below MSRP, they can attract more attention online, and that's where it's going to drive the influence and preference for your dealership through your inventory. It also means that it's not a race to the bottom, it's a race to the consumer, and the prize is the opportunity to influence them. And keep in mind too that they're willing to spend the additional money at your dealership if the value is right. It also means that they're going to be traveling further to do so. So we established a few minutes ago that VDPs are an important communication mechanism to potential buyers. But surveys tell us that new car shoppers, they aren't often aware, or maybe they don't really understand the pricing terminology as well as dealers do. MSRP doesn't seem to resonate as well as other pricing terms either. So when I was talking earlier about not being at MSRP, it's not necessarily about driving a number below MSRP. It might just be coming off of MSRP. That's what this sort of leads us toward as well. So a good number of buyers might just be turned off by the fact that they don't understand MSRP, yet it sits there on their listing. So the opportunity is to move focus away from the messaging on MSRP and add focus around messaging relative to pricing terminology that's more important to the buyers. Okay, so let's say we've said all that. You've got your pricing strategy in place. It's a whole lot more than price, though. I think you guys probably already know that. So let's go back to our fundamentals, and let's take a look to the next area where we're going to investigate. So this is photos and descriptions. We can group these together. Typically, they're called merchandising. And we know, when we just learned that price is always going to be important to shoppers. It's fundamental. But pricing really works in concert with strong merchandising. So we're going to remember back a couple of slides, and we showed this stat where 34% more VDPs were garnered when vehicles were listed below MSRP. So that was looking at price exclusively again. We had taken out all the impacts of merchandising. So let's remember, this is just about price, not merchandising yet. So if we think back to the poll that we ran at the beginning, Lori, do you have those numbers again?
I do. We had 86% saying yes, 2% said no, and 13% saying sometimes.
Excellent. Well, you guys are you all must be market leaders because you definitely understand the value of custom photos. If 86% are using custom photos. So I'll just say congratulations. We are going to go to the next slide and show you the benefit that you garner by adding custom photos. That 34% jumps to 186% more VDPs when you add in custom photos. So the folks who are not using custom photos on their new cars yet, this is a huge opportunity for you to raise the level of influence and to bring your inventory into the consideration set of shoppers online. So we've discussed the impact of pricing below MSRP and the distance that a car buyer is willing to travel. We also conducted a study back in 2012 about the distance that car buyers will travel to make a purchase. And we wanted to look within this study at the impact of merchandising. So we called this our geo-distance analysis. And it was great insights, great attitudinal research. But what we want to do is bounce this attitudinal research up against DAA and analyze the real shopper behavior. So for dealerships that use multiple custom photos, and comparing those to dealerships who do not use photos, we found that 30% more car buyers traveled 30 or more miles to make that purchase. We did the same analysis looking at comments, and you can see the results are pretty similar, with 26% more car buyers who traveled 30 or more miles to the dealership. Dealerships, that is, that use the comments relative to dealerships who did not use the comments. So both findings here strongly suggest that photos and comments, they attract car buyers outside of a local market. Those are really like big, broad scale research studies. It's great stats, but with DAA, we also want to look at some anecdotal real world examples. So what we ended up doing was we found a couple of dealers, and we can compare a dealer's performance and their competitive position relative to their merchandising and pricing strategies. So when we did that, what we found is that dealers who were well merchandised, dealers who priced below MSRP, they had fewer competitors and more share of shoppers on our site. So here's a couple of examples to show you. I'll start off by saying we've taken off all the dealers' names and all that kind of stuff. So again, protecting all of that information. In dealer example number 1, this dealer listed a majority of inventory at MSRP. As it turned out, they were also poorly merchandised and generally priced above their market. So as a result, the car shoppers who viewed their VDPs, they were more likely to be viewing VDPs from a competing dealer in the area. Because a larger share of its shoppers were viewing the VDPs of those competing dealers, its competitive position was eroded. So we'll move on to example number 2. On the other hand, dealer number 2, they listed a majority of their inventory at less than MSRP, and they also had better merchandising, so pictures, comments, and they were priced slightly below their market, so below MSRP and well merchandised. As a result of that activity, the people who saw the VDPs for this dealer were less likely to view VDPs from competing dealers. Effectively, what they did was remove some of the competitors from the influence on their shoppers. So dealer number 2's share of influence for its shoppers was greater, in turn leaving less influence for their competitors. So the implication here is that the right car at the right price that's well merchandised can drive influence and preference for your dealership. And the fact that these strategies, they enable you to introduce your dealership to a shopper's consideration set, which is that important first step of bringing them to your store. All right, so we've talked about the four of the critical operations of the dealership. So we've got vehicle selection, pricing, the merchandising components, but now we need to move offline. And so everything that you've done online to date is driven shoppers to your dealership, but that doesn't mean it's over. Unfortunately, you still have that opportunity to send those shoppers right back into the shopping process if they're not happy. In fact, I think we all know this. The experience at your dealership is one of the top reasons why shoppers choose to purchase from a dealership. Well, let's take a closer look at what that means inside the data. So in a survey conducted last year, the buyers indicated that these were the key reasons for buying from the dealership. Now, the top 3 reasons can be summarized as the right car, the right price, and the experience with the dealer. What's interesting is that the experience with the dealer was ranked number 3 on the list. It wasn't lagging, it's just number 3 on this list. However, if we take a closer look at the responses, some really interesting insights begin to emerge. So here's that full list again. And so by adding in other responses related to dealer interactions, some of those dealer interactions are direct, others are more indirect. What we see, though, is the impact of dealer experience, or that brand the dealer has built, it grows to 60% of responses. So the top 3 reasons, they may be the right car, the right price, and the experience with the dealer at the highest level, but in aggregate, that dealer experience, it can create a tipping point that turns a shopper into your customer. So what can dealers do? We've gone through a lot of information. So today we've looked at a lot of different strategies and tactics to maximize your opportunity to influence shoppers and really become part of their online consideration set. So let's run through a quick recap of all of these. First, it starts with having the right mix of inventory. That right mix of inventory, it makes sure you're putting your dealership in the consideration set of potential buyers. Next, we talked about employing this inventory-based marketing strategy. We know shoppers are going to third-party sites. We know they're going to your dealership website, and they're largely viewing inventory while they're there. So if your cars aren't showing up where they're looking while they're shopping, then you're missing that opportunity to influence them. So just keep in mind the inventory's got to be there. So marketing new and used cars side by side. We saw from the earlier example in that the path to purchase example, that car shoppers, they take this sort of nonlinear path to purchase. So if you're not listing both your new and used together on the same site, you're missing that opportunity to expose them to a vehicle they may not otherwise see. So merchandising, we talked through how pricing and merchandising work really well together to drive influence and preference for your dealership. We also talked about pricing below MSRP and how important that is. It influences shoppers. It earns more buyers. It attracts shoppers from further distances. And we want to remember that pricing transparency, it's a race to the consumer. The next thing we want to do is create this positive customer experience. And some of the tactics we were discussing was connecting that on-lot and online experience. Now, the first thing to recognize when the shoppers come into your dealership is they've likely spent at least 10 hours online shopping. And what you've shown them online, they've chosen your dealership. They've decided to come visit you. So it's important to deliver on that image. And if it's done right, we've shown that there's additional incremental profit opportunity at your store once that shopper does show up. And lastly, making sure your staff are well trained and knowledgeable about, one, your inventory, 2, the different types of consumers coming into your dealership, and 3, all about the services you offer. Just bottom line, that they're top-notch and they can take care of that customer. So it's a lot of great insight, and there's a really powerful tool behind it. So at this point, I just want to say thank you again for this opportunity to share with you some of these insights that we've gathered, both using digital audience analysis as well as some research conducted with our partners. So Lori, at this time, I'll pass the floor back to you.
All right, thank you so much, Nathan. And I know you're not going too far. We're going to have you back for the Q&A at the end of the session. But folks, before we do that, let me bring John Griffin back to share a few words with us and some concluding remarks. Over to you, John.
Yeah, thank you, Lori. Yeah, and I think there's two big takeaways here from this presentation. The first one being that, putting prices other than MSRP on new vehicles increases traffic and profitability. And the second one would be you don't have to give it all away. I mean, it clearly indicates that each car has a sweet spot, and our challenge would be to locate that. So the question becomes is how does Conquest help price new vehicles to the market? Well, first off, it allows the dealer to ID that sweet spot for every new vehicle, both in the same or in competing brands. It also incorporates real-time incentives into the pricing, so I can get my best foot forward out there in a real-time basis. And lastly, it makes pricing automatic. Which means that we can set it up based on makes, models, invoice, and MSRP, and automatically move those prices out into the marketplace. So thank you, Lori.
Well, thank you so much, John. And folks, we've got a couple of questions coming through the queue already, but if you haven't done so and you do have questions in mind, go ahead and type those in so that we can present them to our panelists. Before we do that, I'm going to go to our third and final poll for today. We would like to hear from you. Based on what you heard today, what will be your top challenges moving ahead? And in this case, you can choose all that apply, so go ahead and choose more than one if you'd like. Is it vehicle selection, new car pricing, photos, custom descriptions, comments, or customer handling? Okay, looks like our front runner there in terms of challenges moving ahead is new car pricing. So we've got 19% vehicle selection, 48 new car pricing, 13 photos, 27 custom descriptions and comments, 31 customer handling. Do hope certainly that the information and analytics that you had today were helpful in that process. And without any further ado, I'm going to ask our speakers to step up to the virtual podium in preparation for those questions. But folks, if you do want to continue the conversation after the webinar, there are resources available on the vauto.com website under dealer resources, including a PDF of today's presentation. So if you want to download a PDF of what was presented by Nathan, it will be there. Also wanted to point out that there will be another webinar, so please stay tuned for the next vAuto Educational Series webinar in early July, featuring a current Conquest customer case study outlining their successes, and that will be with Dave Pollock. So please plan to join us for that, and we'll be sending out invitations for that shortly. As well, you're invited to go out and visit www.weworkforyou.com/partners for info on Auto Trader Group solutions and any questions that you might have, answers to any questions that you might have. So going to go ahead and take a look at what we have in our queue. And I'm going to start with a question. This looks like a good one for you, Nathan. Matt's asking, curious if the path of a search used for Ford to used Honda to new Nissan was organic and just consumer driven, or if any of those paths were clicks onto display ads or lease payments, etc.
So that's a great question, and that's a question that we have as well. And unfortunately, I don't have a specific answer for that. We are still investigating and we are looking to answer that specific question when it comes to path to purchase, or just within the shopping experience. What is a shopper seeing and what are they interacting with that might be influencing that path? So it's a great question. We're not quite there yet.
Okay. Very good. Got another one. Oh, actually, here's a good one for you, John. What kind of results are you hearing from dealers using Conquest?
Lori, our preliminary results over the last few months have been extremely positive. Actually, a little bit, beyond what we expected. So those dealers that have adapted, strategies employing Conquest have seen a significant increase in volumes in their market areas. But I will also qualify that a little bit in that, most of these dealers that are initially out in the market with Conquest are also dealers that implement very effective merchandising strategies, which Nathan spoke to a lot. So, getting back to that price, it's not all about price. We're seeing positive results for those dealers who also have their photos and their descriptions and the other merchandising keys put into place. So, but overall, they've been extremely positive.
Okay, thank you. And this one for you, Nathan. David's asking, is it best to show what a pre-discount is before rebates and incentives are applied to the price on a particular model?
That's a very interesting strategic question. I guess anecdotally, I know that we see good results when you have, even if you list MSRP, but you're showing another price next to it, that works really well. Specifically, we didn't dig into that during this analysis, but just based on the insights that we did capture, I think we can infer that that is probably a good idea, because again, as long as you're not completely anchored to the MSRP, we showed that shoppers both said that they weren't familiar with MSRP. They liked the other terminology better. And then when we watched the actual behavior, we did notice that their behavior leaned toward the non-MSRP pricing. So we didn't specifically say if it's there but there's another, is it better? But because there's another, it's inferred that it's aligned better to both the attitudinal and the behavioral research that we have.
Okay, thank you. This question for you, John. Lisa's asking, what is the best pricing scenario for dealers in prime GM purchasing area?
Well, I'm not positive what pricing scenario, what prime GM purchasing area actually means, but I'm going to assume it's a market that's highly competitive in GM product. In that scenario, I would think, consistent with what Nathan talked about, what I want to be able to do is price in an appropriate and competitive position to my competition. And then I think the differentiator is going to be what type of inventory I have. Do I have the inventory that may be a little bit more attractive to the market than the inventory that my competitors have? Do I have the ability to differentiate it a little bit and move towards those type of vehicles which provide a little stronger value proposition to the customer? And then I think secondly, I need to be able to provide a very strong and compelling brand image out into the marketplace and give the customers a reason to choose my dealership over the competitor's dealership. So brand is going to be, the dealership brand is going to be, I think, a big piece of that. And certainly consistent with what some of the things Nathan talked about, I need to find a way to communicate that in a compelling manner to the customer, and then also back that up with an in-store experience which reinforces that value perception that the customer had on my online listings.
Okay, thank you, John. Nathan, this one's from John. What about video? What is the difference in engagement between just looped still shot pictures of the car or actual live footage?
That's a really good question. So video does improve the performance. We've seen that. However, I don't know if we've ever cut into the video and done the comparison on what's in it. So I don't know if a still loop, if just still shots is better than an actual moving video, but the data does tell us that the video improves VDP performance.
Okay, another one for you, Nathan. Tracy's asking, what is the optimal number of photos for new cars?
The $64 million question.
That's right.
This is a great question. So the short answer is there's no magic number. But when it comes to custom photos and new cars, adding custom photos always has an incrementally positive impact on your VDPs. Now, you do get to a certain point where the incremental lift in VDP activity diminishes. Now, that point is reached, though, it's a different point for different dealers in different markets. So there is no one right answer, but if you look around your local market and look who your competitors are, you can probably run a little experiment to see at what point you hit your optimal number that would fit for your business.
Okay, I think we're on a roll here, Nathan. This one coming from Katie. We price our new vehicles with MSRP and a sale price. Should we be using just a sale price instead of both?
Yeah, I would harken back. I think this is similar to the question that was asked earlier, and I would go back to some of the research that was reviewed today, again, on that MSRP terminology, and leaving it there. I don't know technically if it's bad or good, but having the sale price associated with it, it's actually anchoring you to something that the shoppers are more comfortable with. So that's a good practice, because we've shown both attitudinally and behaviorally that shoppers will travel farther, they'll pay more, they'll engage more with a non-MSRP priced vehicle, and so adding that sale price is a good thing.
Okay. Another one for you, Nathan. If I post a price below MSRP, what's the average number of VDPs I should see on a daily or weekly basis for my new cars?
That's another really, really good question. So I think the data nerd in me is going to come out on this question. And that's a single factor that goes into how many VDPs that you're going to get. So I don't have a number that says you're going to get 50% more, 4,000% more VDPs by pricing below MSRP. What I do know, though, is that on our website, about 20% of dealers are pricing exclusively at MSRP, and so that's 80% of the dealers who are pricing new vehicles below MSRP. So of that big giant 80% bucket that have at least some of their vehicles priced at MSRP, 2/3 of their inventory are being priced below MSRP. So I don't know what lift you're going to get, but if you looked around your local market, there's probably an 80% of them or so are pricing their new vehicles at some, or at least a percentage of their new vehicles below MSRP. So you want to make sure that you understand what sort of competitive position you're in, and what your pricing strategy is doing to either support or in some cases maybe be a detriment to that pricing strategy.
Okay, thanks, Nathan. Tracy's asking, this one also for you, Nathan. Regarding the importance of descriptions, are VDPs driven more by seller note descriptions with vehicle information, or dealer information, or information about the deal, for example, payments? So which of these should be prioritized?
Mm-hmm. So we've not done any specific text mining on this, but again, we'll probably infer some of the attitudinal research and then the behavioral research that we've done, knowing that the commentary around the vehicle information, so describing that vehicle more fully, but then also understanding the dealer. So you're creating this environment online that, one, is attracting that shopper initially through that vehicle, but then leveraging those comments to also promote some of the other dealer-based value proposition that you've built. So if we think back to some of the feedback on the surveys for why you bought from a specific dealership, there are all these direct and indirect mentions for the dealership experience. We had things in there like referrals from somebody else, the type of salespeople that you have, So building yourself up, building up your dealership value within that commentary is what's going to help differentiate the dealer when they've selected that vehicle as well. So it all sort of works in concert, right? You got the right car, you got the right price, you've merchandised it, and now you can upsell your dealership in the same bucket as well.
Okay. This one for you, John. And the question is, what specific things can help a dealer create a positive in-store experience?
Yeah, that's a good question, Lori. I think probably most important is that we provide a transparent experience in store. So I want my sales process to be one that's comfortable. I probably want it somewhat scripted, and I would definitely want it transparent. And that's not always the case in all dealerships. I want to be prepared to reinforce the information that we've given out line and validated, and also to provide any other information in a credible manner to the customer, with the intent certainly of affirming the customer's shopping process to get and discover that value proposition to begin with. You may even use some point of sale material in the dealership, both to reinforce the value proposition of the customer experience and also to reinforce the dealership brand. So what we don't want to happen is for the customer to have an online experience that conflicts with the brand that we've communicated to them out on the internet. So we don't want things that are going to confuse the customer or in a way appear to be withholding information or in any way hiding information from the customer. So we need to open that up, be very transparent and very comfortable, as we were online.
Okay, thank you, John. For you, Nathan, David's asking, will a link to print a window sticker improve VDP?
That I do not know. I've not seen that come up in the data before.
Okay, yeah, interesting question for sure.
It is definitely.
Okay, let's see. We've got one more here for you, Nathan. For dealers who price new vehicles below MSRP, how far below MSRP are they actually listing?
Yeah, so well, specific pricing, that's a dealer by dealer decision. Some folks have figured out where that optimal price is, as the ultimate automotive marketplace. They've done a good job of figuring out how to be competitive there. So I haven't dug into specifically what the competitive advantage, if you will, of one particular dealer. But I do know in aggregate, like I said earlier, that about 80% of dealers who have new cars will price them below MSRP. And of those 80%, 2/3 of them are have some percentage of their car below MSRP. So while that specific number is up to the dealer, again, I would say look to your local market and understand that competitive landscape, because that's going to help you craft that pricing strategy that optimizes your ability to impact shoppers and pull your inventory into their consideration set.
Okay, thank you. Nathan, Amy is asking, do most customers search based on the default of search all, or do they search used, new separately?
So our site has recently changed. So these numbers are a little bit older, but it's a good mix of both. What we find is that the initial search can come through the all search. That's I think the number it used to be up over the 60% range, where the default search was the all. Once they're into their search activity, at that point, the changes are as unique as the number of people that come through the website, but the vast majority of the activity was running through the all path. Again, that goes back to some of the importance of having that new and used together, because folks are going to be seeing new and used vehicles together a lot.
All right. Thank you. Got another one here. How can dealers differentiate their dealership experience from competitors on autotrader.com?
That's another really good question. So I would think back probably to that survey of why consumers bought from a specific dealer. We had those three big ones: the car, the deal, and the dealership. And my advice would be to leverage the merchandising components to differentiate not only your inventory, but also promote the unique value of your dealership in those comments as well.
Okay, and I think this is going to be the last one we're going to have time for today. This one coming from David. Nathan, is it best to show what a pre-discount is before rebates and incentives are applied to the price on a particular model?
That's a good question. I may just write that one down and take that one back to my team. We may kick that one around. That sounds like a great opportunity to dig into the data again.
Okay, fair enough. All right, folks, then what I would like to do before we close up for the day is give both of our speakers an opportunity to leave us with some closing remarks. So I'll go over to you first, Nathan.
Awesome. Les, thank you again for this opportunity. I really enjoyed discussing these insights with you, and my hope is that you heard some insights today that were interesting, but most importantly, proved to be useful to you and your dealership. So again, thank you, and everybody enjoy your holiday weekend. You guys are probably working really hard this weekend.
All right. Thank you so much, Nathan. And over to you, John.
Yes, and again, I want to thank Nathan for the wonderful presentation today, and I want to thank everybody for joining in. I think the one thing we always come back to is whatever we're doing, if we want to be successful, there's probably more than one thing we have to be doing right, and I think today was a good example of that. I mean, we talked about a lot of different things that affect customer behavior on the AutoTrader site, or customer behavior when they're shopping, and buyer behavior, and it involves a lot of different elements. And that's challenging, but it's also pretty exciting that there's a lot of different things we can do to improve overall performance. So those are good things to think about and good things to work on. And everybody have a great holiday.
All right. Thank you, John. And before we sign off, as well, I'd like to thank you each for joining us. Trust you found today to be of value. Special thanks to Nathan Tenbrink and John Griffin, and to the sponsor for today, vAuto. And most importantly, again, thanks for joining. This is Lori Dearman saying have a great rest of the week. Bye for now.